How lovely to see so many of you here. My name is Kate Moss. I'm a novelist and a playwright, and have had the very good fortune to be hosting these pre- and post-performance talks for Daniel Evans' first season here at CFT. Yay! Thank you! And this evening, this is the last pre-show talk of the season, and we're here to celebrate a brand new play, one of several brand new plays that have come to Chai this year, and we're so thrilled about that. And we're going to talk about it just in a moment, and this is James Graham in the middle. But just before we do talk about quiz, we started the season, you started your first season, over the way in the big house, with 40 Years On. I interviewed you for that as the director, a living playwright, and now we're here with another living playwright, a little bit younger, possibly. And I just wanted to say, I think on behalf of everybody, blimey. I mean, it's been an amazing season. And I'm not getting the chance to interview you about all of that. But just one question. Did you think it would go so well? Because it has been an astonishing season, and you've changed things and done all the things that Chai loves as well. And you've brought in lots of different types of writers, lots of different types of people. But it really has been a barnstorming first season, and you should be pleased. Are you pleased?
Yeah, I'm pleased. But, you can always do better. So, yeah.
Is that next year?
Yeah.
Right, well, he's obviously not going to play this game at all with me, so we're going to move on. James, this is your third new play this year. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you tired?
I am, but also I feel like in a very lucky position whereby I consider myself what I enjoy writing about is politics and events. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a lot of politics and events at the moment. So I think in this small window of time, while for whatever reason I feel like I can find great directors who trust stages to me and things like that, that you have almost a responsibility to be trying to work as hard as you possibly can. So.
Yeah. Well, obviously Ink is playing in the West End, Labour of Love is playing in the West End. We had the amazing house that came from the National and then came down here, and many of you will have seen that. And now we have this absolutely astonishing play, Quiz. I saw it last night, and actually, I'm not sure I've had a theatre experience quite like it, because I felt completely different, in a good way, obviously, yes. In terms of a new play, and you have this wonderful ability to take what people would often be tribal about, so be on this side or that side in politics, and actually tell a story both about the people and about the things that surround it. Now, this play, for me, it seemed it was about truth and lies and what is reality and what is not reality. Can you say a little bit about where the very first idea for the play came from? Was it the coughing major? Was it quiz shows and who they were for? Was it the bigger question of truth and lies? Where did it start?
I think for me it always starts with the narrative, with the story that's or the potential story to be told. And I remember watching, as I'm sure many of you remember, watching that documentary about the coughing major and then following the trial and being spellbound by it. So I always thought that would make a good story. But then I think for me it has to then operate on a greater plane than that. It has to provoke political conversations. And it feels like a weird, strange vessel to channel these anxieties into. But when I started working on this about a year and a half ago, this was the first time during the referendum and during the Trump presidency campaign that words like post-truth and alternative facts and objectivity versus subjectivity was becoming a dominant part of discussions about our news and our justice and our politics. And very weirdly, I thought this story about the coughing major might be a fun theatrical platform by which to ask questions about truth, because it's based on a quiz. And as you know, in quizzes, there is a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And increasingly, I feel like in politics or in news, that feels less the case, that people can argue two lies are true or two truths are lies. And and what we used to take as evidence now no longer exists. So, but also I really love institutions. I love British institutions. None of my plays ever transferred to Broadway because I'm obsessed by Britishness. So the Labour Party or the Sun newspaper or British commercial television and the history of the game show from Opportunity Knocks through to Take Your Pick through to The Price is Right. There's something about that which I wanted to understand my own obsession about, my own love of that stuff.
And when you have this idea and you start to write, do you let the story or the characters take you where they will, or do you have particular sort of, tent posts, I suppose, that you want to cover on the way?
Yeah, I always do quite a lot of planning in advance, and obviously when you are dealing with a real-life event and real-life characters, you hit the ground running in terms of characters' biographies and an event that is in a way already structured for you. But then what was key for me for this is it was aliveness and a theatricality, and that's why I was so excited to be paired with Daniel because of his skill set in that area to make something that on paper might seem quite dry, a trial, questions of truth or lies, come to life in a way that feels bigger and more human. And so I left gaps for Daniel to insert himself into, I think.
Whoa!
Yeah.
At what point did you, Daniel, become part of this project? Was it something that you heard about, or did James come to you with it? How do it work? Because I think all of us like to know how the marriages in theatre actually come about.
Well, we didn't commission this play. It was commissioned by William Village, who's the chief exec of Regent's Park Open Air Theatre and also a commercial producer. And I was still at Sheffield at the Crucible Theatre at the time, and William got in touch to say that he had a new play by James and would I be interested. So, of course, I said yes. And then the minute I read it, and this was about 2 years ago.
God, was it? Okay. No, I think it was only
a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
That I knew that I wanted to do it. And then, of course, I had a change of job and a change of location. And I just thought it would be a great play for us to examine here, particularly, actually, in this wonderful space. Because for those of you who've seen the play, there is a discussion about the nature of this particular game show that is examined in this play and how it uses the audience and how the layout of the studio itself is particular, which suits this space. But I think the thing that I was fascinated by was the exploration of the blurring of lines between entertainment, politics, justice, the judiciary, and actually all aspects of life. How now we are being fed through social media messages that aren't always conscious or benign.
So when you're talking about obviously with King Lear, people know, they know it's not going to end well. With a new play, it's very hard because obviously you don't want to spoil anything that's going to happen. Sure. But one of the things that I thought was so really brilliant, actually, in the play, both your writing and the directing of it, is that everybody I could hear talking about came in with a view. They all knew that he was guilty, stroke not guilty. And in the bar, in the interval and at the end, there was consternation, actually, because everybody realised how easy it was to manipulate us. Now, with that, when you're writing, you start with these two characters, Charles and Diana Ingram, and they're there. What is your relationship with the real people, or the biography, and how much do you feel as a playwright it's actually about your responsibility to the play, I suppose, and the story you're trying to tell?
Yeah, I think that's always the tricky balance, and I think sometimes it depends on the style and the language of your play. So I think if you're doing something that feels like a historical document or something that's very naturalistic, then I feel like your responsibility to the truth is greater. But I think also it's very possible for you to have a style of theatre which is overtly an illusion or overtly playful, whereby you're declaring your aim to the audience that this is art, this is not truth, this is us manipulating you in the way that we're also accusing the news media or politicians are manipulating you back. So it's, I think it can depend on the language. But I feel, I think my balance, if you want to call it that, isn't just a moral one, though I feel a moral one. I do feel a moral responsibility to be as kind and to as fair to people as possible, even if it's surprising recipients of that.
Murdoch in ink.
Rupert Murdoch, for example. You would expect a playwright, I guess, in a theatrical tradition that, generally speaking, is seen as being on the liberal spectrum, to massacre him. But so I feel a moral responsibility to Rupert Murdoch to not deliberately misrepresent him. But I also just think it's politically and dramatically inert if your expectations of what's going to happen when you enter the theatre are entirely fulfilled and none of that is challenged or provoked. And I also just don't think that's real. I think in reality, in reality, it's always more confusing, and people are a big contradiction of motivations and desires, and it is entirely grey. So why pretend it's black and white? So in a strange kind of way, that dichotomy between truth, lies, black and white is we try and represent that in this play very explicitly, but also structurally. There is a difference between Act 1 and Act 2. So when you come in for the second act, there's a different argument that is presented to you. And I'd hope the show doesn't declare either way what we think, but it's really hard because you haven't seen it. But yes.
No, this is why you must come back for the post-show.
Yes.
So I had a woman behind me in the interval, just before the interval, who said last night, she said, well, it's difficult to know where they're going to go next, she said. And then afterwards she went, well, who'd have thought? And it was a very Chichester moment, I felt. One of the things, again, not spoiling it, but you can see that we're in a wonderful set, and I think you can imagine that there are some gizmos involved. When you're writing, James, and then when Daniel is involved, and has obviously been involved for a long time, at what point does it go from being black and white words on the page to, but if we do it this way with these lights or this piece of music or this piece of choreography, it will change the story? So how do you start to bring all the other creative people in to work with the super creative who starts it all off?
Well, it all starts with James's words, and it starts and ends with James's words. And I've been very, very fortunate that we've had a fantastic team of collaborators on this. The set is by Rob Jones. You can see most things light up, and that's the work of Tim Lutkin, which, as they do in television studios. But we also have a brilliant movement director, Naomi Saeed, and the whole team is just at the top of their game, so that's great. We also have a lot of technology, as you mentioned, which has been quite challenging at times. It's definitely the most technological thing that I've directed. But I have to say, James has also been very collaborative in allowing me at times to be a very pedantic director, making sure that I understand what his intention is and making that intention clear for the audience. And also we're very, very lucky that we have a cast who are pretty egoless and ready to serve, again, James's play. But I think even though the structure has remained the same since I read it, within that there's some detail that's developed and gone and come back and been added to, and that's been fascinating.
When do you feel it's the play, James? Press night? Or, you know what I mean? Because
yes,
because you're still, the paint isn't quite dry yet. So when does it become the play?
It's probably the play now, before we open, because we're sharing it with audiences. And yes, the joy of theatre is that during these early shows, when we're working together for 5, 6, 7 of them, you can work with the company to make small little changes based on what you learn every preview. But I think the shape of it, the tone of it, the feel of it, it feels real almost on the first preview. And writing feels, that job title doesn't feel right to me because it makes it sound very literary. And there's nothing wrong with that, Kate Moss. But
yes, well, I'm going over here now.
But I feel like making a piece of theatre is never exclusively literary, and you have to put the words down on the page so that somebody can read it. But I never have a script with me in rehearsal. I don't hold a physical draft because I don't feel like it's text. I feel like it's a living, breathing, moving, physical thing. so for me, it only becomes real once it gets up on its feet and actors start saying the words. And I don't know how else to make work except to be constantly changing it in the room, to be changing it based on how you respond to it, whether that be with your laughter or your gasps or your snoring, or like we'll know very early on if we've reached you or if we haven't reached you. And it's a living, breathing thing. And even actually, once a production finishes, I think when people reproduce your plays that you can still respond in 10, 20, 30 years' time to be constantly adapting.
But how do you decide, both of you, when you bring it in to the theatre and suddenly there's an audience? And I know here there's a brilliant system of dress rehearsals and, privileged visitors and then it's audience. How do you decide if you need to change something, either of you, either the words or the direction, because it's not landing with the audience, or whether actually the audience is wrong? But because some people laugh at odd moments. I'm always surprised when people are laughing and when they're not. And last night I realised I was the only person laughing at one moment. But how do you decide when you're pinning it down, what you change and what you keep? Daniel?
Clarity. It's just, whether or not, it gets very technical, and you can have debates about whether or not a laugh line is amusing or whether it's a belly laugh. You can't hear a smile, and that's fine. But I guess it always boils down to, are the audience understanding? Do we feel, do we sense through our eyes and ears and all our other senses that the audience are somehow being able to take away what James intended them to take away? And hopefully they're doing that and more. So I guess it's a bit of healthy challenge. Like I say to James, that word there, is that really what we mean? And he'll say, yes. And then I'll say, really? And
he'll say...
Then he'll change it.
There is a right answer and there is a wrong answer, as we've been saying. No, I think Daniel's right. I think sometimes it's a sense, a feel that in the room that something is as sharp and as clear and as penetrating as it can be. Other times that it's baggy and there's air and that you can reduce that. Ultimately, I think it's a process of conflating and working out night after night after night. What's the story that you're telling? Does every moment on stage, every word, every line add to that single narrative drive? If it doesn't, even if it's getting a huge laugh, would the play be better off without that? Because that ultimately is not the story we're telling. And I think you can only learn that when you put it in front of an audience.
And one of the things I felt was so strong was an incredible cast. Across the board, ensemble cast. But at the same time, Gavin spoke Stephanie Street as Charles and Diana. Fantastic. The always brilliant Sarah Woodward, who people will know from this house, but actually everybody perfect, and some of them with many occasions to be perfect in different roles. With that sort of ensemble work, where there is a great deal of backwards and forwards, there's only two people who play just, one character. How much do you know who you want when you audition in a play like this? And how much do you sit there together thinking, that's my girl, that's my boy? Because, with the old-fashioned play, with Lear, you need Ian McKellen or, Glenda Jackson, whoever. You start there. But with this, your work, there is such an amazing sort of fluid backwards and forwards. It's very unique, I think. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, there are 54 characters.
Really? God.
Yes. And
I'll lend it to you later.
And we have 11 actors. James's play in the preamble suggests that we can do it with 10, and I found out that you can't. So we needed 11. So, and you could probably do it with 30 or more. It's the sky's the limit, really. But some of the things that we are asking actors to do in this play are curious and very. They don't come along that often. So if you've bought a programme, you'll see already that one actor has to play, I think I can say this, I'm not giving anything away, Chris Tarrant, who's a character, Des O'Connor, Leslie Crowther, Jim Bowen, and Bruce Forsyth. And that audition process was interesting because we...
And that's Keir Charles, and he is absolutely tremendous.
We are so lucky to have Keir because he's... well, I was going to say the process began with us seeing people who could do impressions. And they were excellent impressions, and we were rolling about in the rehearsal room laughing, thinking, you know, that's amazing. But then quickly realised that actually we needed an actor who was a chameleon and who could really bring out the dramatic situation, and not just someone who... that's not to denigrate the work of impressionists, because I really genuinely think they're amazing. But Keir brings part of Keir Charles to those parts too. And I think that's always part of the deliciousness for an audience, is seeing how an actor matches the part. And, you know, there are, I think, Lizzie Winkler, who's one of our great actors, I think she plays 9 parts. And some of them are very fleeting, and so she has to arrive in a scene and be able to tell us all about that character in a matter of seconds. And so we needed people who are good at comedy, but who are also all chameleons, except for Gavin and Steph, who play Charles and Diana. And for those two, we needed people who could really be the bedrock of the play and the performance.
And actually, one of the things I thought was so effective about the same Keir doing all the impressions is that it underlined the fact that those people are playing a role.
Yes.
And that was brilliant,
yeah.
Actually, because, you know...
No, I think I would hate the version of this play where 54 actors played 54 parts, because I genuinely love, as you identified, and I think I could be wrong, but I think audiences really like to feel a company and to see a company working. And exactly that. So Lizzie, bless her, will walk off that way as a journalist, and 10 seconds later walk on that way as a model on a game show, or a coughing expert. And the show itself is not hiding the fact that that's the same actor. It's part of the language of the show and the language of illusion and presentation that I think feeds into the themes of the play. But we did that in this house, in this same space. I enjoy the idea of a single actor playing 5, 6, 7 different MPs, whether it's Michael Heseltine or Ken Clarke. And there's no apology or disguise of that, because I feel like... And it just makes the work in the rehearsal room so rewarding to find a team of actors and a company of actors that's very close, where you're asking a huge amount technically of them. But they become very invested in the play, and they become very invested in the newness of the play and testing it for the very first time in front of a brand new audience. And it's the most thrilling thing as a writer when you see a company take ownership of their many different parts and of the play itself. And they've taught you about it. It's fabulous.
One of the things that I was surprised about, having seen it last night, is that I then went back today and looked up the real story and discovered, what did I think? Now, I don't know what you felt. You're so even-handed in all your work, and Daniel, you also are a very even-handed person. Did you go in with a view about did they do it or not? And if you did you change your minds? Or are you not prepared to say? Because you're asking that of us as the audience.
In a way, I think that's... I mean, yes. I mean, the truth is that what excited me about the idea, and we worked with a journalist who was writing a book that suggested maybe the Ingrams were innocent of the crime, and it was exciting for me as someone who had been completely convinced of their guilt, regardless of what I think now. It was an exciting mental exercise for me to question all of the narratives and all of the perceptions that I had about something, and felt so confident about it. Yeah. And then to see how very quickly, when you come at it from a different angle, it all falls away. And I think that happens in thousands of instances all the time, in politics or in our own lives, when we're so convinced of something, but then when we see it from a different angle, we go, oh yeah, maybe they're just behaving that way because of that. And I think perception in particular has become almost a banner headline for what the play's about, and how we can all be manipulated, including how we, Daniel and James, are going to try and manipulate you. And the show sort of holds its hand up as a magic trick and goes, nothing can be taken for granted as real. So I deliberately haven't answered your question there.
No, I didn't think you would, but I thought it would be worth asking, just in case.
I, like James, I saw the documentary in 2003, and I remember it very, very clearly because it actually made me feel sick. That someone would do that have the balls to do that in front of a live studio audience. And remember, more people, well, lots of people watched Millionaire, but more people watched that documentary than watched Diana's funeral. That's right, isn't it?
That is right. Yeah.
And I remember feeling sick that that they even attempted such a thing. And then reading the play and reading Bob's book and doing some more research and having some meetings with some interesting people, just enjoyed starting to question whether it was possible that what we were told in that documentary wasn't the whole truth.
Yes. And a final question before we go out to some audience questions. And I kind of know the answer, obviously, but, you know, this is what we're doing, is it seems to me, James, particularly, that you are chronicling some of the things that cause us as British people now the most conflict and confusion. Do you think that actually at the moment, on the stage, and sometimes in film, but particularly on the stage, that you people can bring to all of our attention things that are very hard to deal with in day-to-day life, because you can actually frame them and leave them open for us to all leave and have that conversation in the car park? Because otherwise people are always tribal, they're for or against everything, and little is. You know, do you think at the moment that the stage is more important than possibly it's been for some time?
I do, and I don't want, I'm wary of overemphasizing my own importance or my own influence as a playwright. But regardless of whatever I do, I think, generally speaking, the stage is exactly as you analyze it, which people talk about filter bubbles, people talk about us being more divided and more tribal and divided into factions. And I think that is true. And I do think we are divided by the nature of how we receive our news, how we share our news, the quality of the conversation that we have with each other now. And I'm as guilty as anyone for whacking out a 140-letter tweet, or 280, as I believe they've just changed it now, to something where I just react instantly and create the illusion that that's a conversation, when actually that's just people yelling into a void and getting very cross with one another. And I think the nature of entertainment and the nature of art has become more private as well. So even things that used to be very public, going to the cinema or watching television with a family of 5, 6 people around the same screen, has become very atomized and very private. I now watch films on Netflix, and I do it on my own with my earplugs in, and it's a private thing. And I'm only watching that film because that's what the algorithm recommended to me because of my biases and my prejudices. So it suddenly becomes very atomized. And so without over-romanticizing what I think theatre can do, I think that is its main function now, which is in a world where our political conversations become so unnuanced and so factional and tribal and overly simplified and overly aggressive, that to remind all of ourselves that actually we're way more tolerant and fair than that. And I think there's something about the theatre space, because it's physical, you're forced into a space together, you're given 2 hours of time rather than a flash of a comment on a thread, that you engage more intelligently and fairly with a debate. I think exactly for those reasons we need theatre. The challenge then is how you make sure that as many people can get into a theatre space as possible to really diversify the argument. But there's no excuse really to not be trying, I don't think.
I was going to say one of the things that I feel, James, that you're really interested in, and having seen many of your plays now, it feels like your particular kind of play and language and use of language has a lightness to it. That means that there's a reach for a kind of popularity and a kind of a populism. And often that's made richer by the fact that you are often, in the background to your plays, often exploring populism. And particularly in this play, the birth of television and then the birth of commercial television and people wanting to watch the adverts when they first came on, and wanted, therefore, to acquire more things post-war, and how then social media has taken us into a whole new realm of populism, and how everyone can seemingly have a voice through these channels, and how we think that we're in a democracy, or that those media are democratizing, until we find out that we're also being watched and hacked and influenced in ways that none of us, except George Orwell, it seems, predicted.
Yeah. And that wonderful theme through the play of people like us and people like them, which is so lightly done. But actually that's part of the story of who gets on the show in the first place.
Yes.
And actually, I said it was a final question. One final question for me before the audience. Because I think it would be remiss not to mention the music and the very clever way that you've integrated all the theme tunes that we know with, I would suggest, a couple of parodies of certain bits of music that probably are not represented, but I won't say that. I think when you see it, you will recognise a parody of certain things. When you're doing something like this, where you are very clear in the programme that this is an imaginative interpretation of things that happened, what is the problem when you're trying to clear the music and the, because I imagine that is rather huge, when you have The Millionaire and you have, The Price is Right, and we're all going back through our childhoods right to the beginning. But, if you don't get those permissions, how do you make it work? Did you always think you would, or is that Daniel's job?
Well, I have to say that a massive shout-out to Andrew Slow. He's our production administrator, and he has been working away for about 2 months now, helping us acquire permission to use images, footage, and theme tunes, logos, which really are peppered throughout the play. However, also huge kudos to Ben Ringham, our sound designer, who has made, you've heard of looky-likeys, well, we have soundy-likeys.
They're brilliant.
And they're meant to be very, very redolent of the theme tunes that we know and love. They aren't quite them, but we hope that they're close enough that you think they are. And hopefully that'll get us out of a lot of legal trouble.
I think they should just write to the artistic director of the theatre and it'll all be fine.
Who's that?
Right, we have time for some questions. So does anybody have a question they'd like to start? There's a lady there in blue and then Greg there. Lovely, thank you.
Richard Ingrams was talking about his book on Ludovic Kennedy on Sunday night at Petworth, and he mentioned that the coughing major and Bob Woofenden had sent him a copy of the book, and that he'd also sent you a copy of the book. I wondered how much influence he had on your play, or whether he actually worked with you on it.
Thank you very much. James?
Yeah, so that was the starting point. His book, which he co-wrote with James Plaskett, re-examined that trial and some of the evidence, and actually is a really entertaining sort of broader look at how a game show is made and the history of the game show and the fate of this particular show, the most successful game show of all time, how it spread around the world. And it's quite an affectionate look at why people loved the show. And I come to this having absolutely loved Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and still loving it, and it being a really felt thing. So yes, it was influential, but also from the very beginning, we allowed ourselves the freedom to be motivated by the arguments of that book and the work of that book, but to go off in our own direction and to find our own sort of language. And to always make sure we were trying to be as balanced and as fair as possible to all sides. But no, he did a lot of the work I would have had to have done, so I was very grateful to him.
Brilliant. Greg?
Hi, I wonder whether I could ask both of you about your view about the gestation period of the play. And particularly I'm interested to know whether you have a view of which is your favourite part of the process, from the point at which either the words arrive on the page to the final performance in the theatre of this particular performance, and whether you have a particular part of that process which gives you the most excitement or the most adrenaline.
Thank you. 5-star reviews, I think.
That's jinxed
Don't
it.
jinx it.
I don't know.
I particularly enjoy the technical rehearsal, because by then you've hopefully done all your foundation work with the actors and had a few rehearsal room run-throughs. And we were lucky the person who runs this theatre is an idiot because he scheduled only 2.5 days for a technical rehearsal. That's me, by the way. So we had 2.5 days to have all our technical rehearsals for a very, very technical show. And how we did it, I don't quite know. Well, we did it by having the Revolve in our rehearsal room and having Ben Ringham, our sound designer, be with us for 2 whole weeks in the rehearsal room. So much of that choreography and sound world we already knew. So then the technical rehearsal was mostly about costume. Actually, we added costume in the last week of rehearsal too, but mostly about lights. And it's only then when you really start to put the play together under the lights and when you can really see what you've got. And I find that particularly sometimes frustrating because you need the patience of Job, but at the same time you see it come together in a very, very exciting way. So I think I love tech.
James?
I hate tech because it's nothing to do with the writer. It's the way the writer hands it out. No, I'm kidding. It is the bit where the writer has to sort of really let go quite a lot, and I enjoy it for that. I enjoy sitting quietly in the back of the tech while other people, sound, lights, bring their magic to your play, and it's always very humbling to see people with such talents interpret your work in that way. It's great. But I think for me it's probably not the first preview because that's always terrifying. But I would say second, third, fourth preview, once it starts to settle into a rhythm and you feel like you know what you've got by then and you're sharing it for the first time. And sometimes these stories, plays, characters have been in your head in a very lonely sense for about 1.5 years. And you keep them, as you must know, you keep them to yourself for such a long time. And then you start to share them with a director and a company and a cast. But it's only when 290 people come and experience it that it finally feels real. So I do love that. It's all about the sharing for me.
Oh, that's lovely. Another question. Gentleman up there.
I'd like to change the subject a little bit, if I may. Let me put it like this. If I was looking at an oil well gushing with oil, there's a sort of great creative flood and flow, as I do when I watch James's work, I would know where it came from. It came from millions of years of pressure and forests back in the Jurassic period. I would know where it came from and how it happened. But when I look at someone as young as James, and I say to myself, all that maturity and all that extraordinary creativity must have come from somewhere. If we were in Russia, we would know. He would have been a prodigy at the age of 4. He'd have gone to a special writers' school. He would have been a gold star citizen. And by the time he was 17, he was probably writing quite fluently. But what I want to ask James is, when did you know you were on this journey? At what age did it become clear to you and those around you that this was going to happen? Or maybe it didn't, maybe it was just an explosion. In other words, where does it come from is point 1 of the question. And point 2 of the question is the standard one. You know, who was the influence on you? Does this come from masses of copious reading? Do you know Dostoevsky off by heart? Or does it just come from somewhere else? Could you explain that to us?
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how conscious you can be of where it comes from, except theatre came quite late to me, and I didn't really have it much in my life. It wasn't an artistic family, but I did grow up, and maybe this speaks to why popular culture features so often in my work, is that it's I grew up obsessed by television, obsessed by TV dramas, not even necessarily highbrow TV dramas. I remember Coronation Street would be something I would record, and if I was ever out the house and come back and watch it at the age of 8 or 9 years old, I just love stories, I love narrative. I thought I was going to be a novelist, and at the age of 4, I bullied my mum into buying me a typewriter, and I started writing stories. But theatre came really late. It was a teacher, which I know is probably very cliche. My drama teachers at school, it was a comprehensive school in Nottinghamshire. It was the most overly subscribed school in the country, but I was so lucky to be there because they had convinced themselves that drama and art should be part of a driving force in the curriculum. So I was pushed onto the stage and did plays. And the discovery of theatre and the liveliness of theatre and the sharing with an audience in front of you was transformative for me. And that, I guess that without banging a political drum, my main worry about the way that education is moving at the moment is that the emphasis is very much not on drama and arts, and that's diminishing. So yes, without education, without school, I would have got nowhere. And then luckily, when I was sending off my plays to theatres, at the age of 19, I sent off a history about Albert Einstein and the atomic bomb when all younger writers were being encouraged to write relationship dramas or single-handers or plays for young people about young people. And I was just very lucky that I've found all the way through my writing life, including now, directors and producers who believe that slightly younger writers should be writing those bigger plays for bigger spaces. And I've accidentally seemed to have found a niche which I think 10 years ago nobody thought would be commercially viable. I definitely didn't think anyone would want to put a play about the Labour Party on the West End stage and have Martin Freeman and Tamsin Greig in it, but I'm glad, and that's down to the audience as well. There is an audience for political work, which is really exciting, and they're trusting new work too. So, yes, teachers and directors. Thank you.
What next, then? I mean,
just me.
Well, no, following on from that question, I mean, there are so many subjects you could choose. And I know you're writing something for Hull, the City of Culture, your university town, and all of that. But when you look around, there is so much you could write. Do you just wait till it taps you on the shoulder? You know, how do you decide?
Sometimes you're driven by events. So, of course, yes, I'm doing a Brexit TV drama that will be about the campaign. Quite binary as well, like this play, the two different camps, Leave versus Remain, and focusing on the tactics they used. So sometimes you're just driven by events, but equally, I don't feel this great responsibility to be chronological. So I don't feel the pressure to do my Donald Trump play or my Theresa May play. I feel like I can take my time, take a longer view than that. And for me, I was discussing this earlier with these students here, that for me it's the joy of using historical events means that you don't feel like you have to be a journalist. You don't feel like you have to be constantly putting today's news on the stage that night. You can find a historical equivalent and pour into that story, whether it be about the Sun newspaper or about a coughing major, all of the anxieties of the day, but it be broader, bigger, more universal than that.
I think that is a brilliant way, sadly, to have to finish. As part of this season, Daniel, you talked about a lot of the plays were about change, about a focus on living writers, and you framed the season. I really can't imagine a more wonderful play to finish this season than this. All of you have not yet seen it. You are in for a treat, and it's very rare that you come out of the theatre thinking differently, properly differently from how you went in. And I think that this play achieves that, and we all wish you the absolute best of press nights, but it doesn't matter because it's brilliant anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Evans and James Graham.